Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session today on sustainability. I'm Charles, co-founder of The Food People, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking to you all today. And this is the presentation that I was unable to deliver at Specialty Fine Food Fair on the 6th and 7th of September 2021. Just to tell you a little bit more about The Food People, we have been shifting the future of food and drink by harnessing the power of trends for about 16 years. We're a team that is very much united and, dare I say, obsessed by this purpose. And that's a unity that brings us all together as a group of people. We see ourselves and our clients as champions of change and innovation. We're all in the business of change. We as TFP are here to stimulate you with foresight, support you in interpreting trends so that you can impact your business and the industry to enable growth. That's really what we're all about. So just to contextualize, the broad topic of sustainability is clearly a vast and complex subject that spans far beyond just food and drink. And what we're going to do is spend the next 20 to 30 minutes bringing to life some of the bigger trend movements that are gaining momentum as a result of consumers' rapidly growing awareness of this being a pressing issue for today and not tomorrow through the eyes of food and drink. I think it's fair to say that we've all had a massive wake-up call. COVID has shone a spotlight on our food system like never before. And at the same time, the world has recognised and scrambled to fix vulnerabilities in our food supply chain. We've all been driven to think about the safety of, yes, what we put into our bodies and the realities of food as it relates not just to our health and nutrition, but at a much wider level, the global ecosystems, biodiversity, and sustainability, which is what we're here to talk about today. We've all seen over the past few weeks and months a series of wake-up calls, from things like flooding and wildfires to the IPC report that provides as much chapter and verse as anyone could reasonably want as to what the future may look like if more isn't done, both to mitigate and to adapt to the risks that lie ahead. That particular reporting declared a code red for humanity, stating that it is now inevitable that we will reach 1.5 degrees global warming by 2040, which will bring more extreme heat waves, things like droughts, flooding, wildfires. The study is very much a sobering reminder that the food and drink sector's net zero targets is not just a nice to have. If we don't achieve them, we might see our ability to produce food severely compromised in the near future. And that comes on top of course, Brexit and COVID, neither of which are exactly behind us yet. This is a daunting ask for the food industry that's already shown huge resilience and determination to keep supplies moving. But as the IPC report, but also Dimbleby's National Food Strategy both make clear, business as usual is no longer an option. It's time to make the time to make change is very much fast running out. And it's these wake-up calls and many others that means sustainability is not just at the forefront of the food and drink industry, but very much at the forefront of the consumer psyche. And as science, as media reports on the evolution of this and the impact that it's having, not just within food and drink, but broader than that, we can expect it to stay at the forefront of consumer psyche. And it's a key concern for consumers. This is borne out by a recent Deloitte survey from earlier on in 2021 that states that sustainability remains a key consideration for consumers, with 32% of consumers highly engaged with adopting a more sustainable lifestyle. Equally important, 20% of consumers have stopped buying certain products due to ethical and environmental concerns. Overall, a lack of interest remains the main barrier to adopting a sustainable lifestyle, which we believe this ongoing wake-up calls will service into that, as well as issues around accessing relevant information, which we'll talk more about in a second. Consumers want to do more, but also want many brands to take the lead, with 64% from this particular study of consumers wanting brands to reduce their packaging, 50% want information on how to recycle, 46% need clarity on the sourcing of products. And it's infrequent essential purchases like food, groceries, household items, personal care that consumers say that they most often consider sustainability. And according to this particular piece of work by Deloitte, the 5 sustainable brand practices that consumers value most include things like waste reduction, reducing carbon footprint, providing sustainable packaging, committing to ethical work practices and respecting human rights. And whilst there's growing concern across all generations, Gen Z are adopting more sustainable behaviours faster than any other groups. The previously mentioned Deloitte study found that 50% reduced how much they buy and 45% stopped purchasing certain brands because of ethical or sustainable concerns. As wealth over time transferred to the younger generation, sustainability and ethical considerations will need to become the standard, need to be transparent throughout the entire value chain. But the idea of sustainability sales is one that is growing, and research from YouGov in April revealed that consumers worldwide are willing to pay more to address their environmental concerns. 3 in 5, so 57%, of grocery shoppers in the UK and a slightly higher percentage in Germany agree that they're willing to bear the additional expenses to buy products that are better for the environment. Other markets that were well over half, including the US and Australia as well. So in summary, yeah, we're in the midst of a wake-up call. Sustainability is increasingly important. Gen Z are leading the charge, and there is some willingness to pay for this through the supply chain. So there are many areas of trend manifestation that are driven by the rise in interest in the role that food and drink play in broader sustainability. But what I want to focus on are 5 or 6 of those that we expect to continue to gain traction during and beyond 2022. As you'd expect, much of the focus is around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon in particular, associated with food production, as well as water and land use as well. And the first one that I'm going to start with is making a positive choice easier for consumers. Highlighted in the Deloitte work that I referenced a few moments ago, one of the biggest issues for consumers is around trust in information to make a positive and informed choice. And this is beginning to change as a number of schemes are being piloted this autumn. Lidl with their Eco Score and many other brands and retailers with the Foundation Earth's Eco Impact Score, rating to assess consumers' response to front of pack environmental scores as it sets out developing an optimum scoring system and labelling for full rollout in 2022. In the UK pilot, they'll use a method developed by Mondra, which assesses the food's environmental impact through 4 key areas: water usage, water pollution, biodiversity loss, and carbon. In its simplest terms, it's about gathering the information about the product, conducting a life cycle assessment to put the numbers to the impacts, and finally awarding the score that you're likely to see on the front of pack. They're also heavily focused on the automation of this process post-pilot. Any eco-labelling needs to be simple to communicate, applicable to all foods, really importantly, fair to all food types, and really importantly, encourage positive change and innovation. As information is one of the biggest barriers to making a positive choice, we really expect this to continue to gain momentum. We've seen it exist in worlds like the consumer electronics now for a number of years. And there are a number of systems already in place, but they are perhaps less transparent and perhaps biased towards industry. So expect this to continue to gain momentum. And similar momentum is gaining traction in the out-of-home and delivery sectors too, with brands like Panera Bread and Chipotle introducing climate badging and labelling on menus to enable diners to make a positive choice out of home. And then the notion of choice extends across the dining spectrum, with Michelin's green sustainable gastronomy clover, as you'll have probably seen. The new clover leaf icon recognises restaurants that promotes sustainable working practices such as recycling, food waste reduction, sustainable ingredient sources. And this complements the work that the likes of the Sustainable Restaurant Association have been doing, all assisting consumers to make a responsible choice out of home. So making that positive choice and making it easier for consumers to make that positive choice is something that we expect to really gain momentum, not just in retail, but also in food service as well. And next is this notion of refill and return revolution. As many of you listening will be aware, there's been some incredible work done within the industry and within organisations such as Unwrapped to eliminate the use of single-use plastics. Plastics that are used are then to be reusable, recyclable and compostable, and also to increase the amount of recycled content in plastic packaging. However, one of the routes that's gaining real traction is packaging free, including refill and return, both in the retail and food service environment. Some recent research from M&S, which extended its own fill your own offering to a third store recently, found that 2/3 of consumers were more likely to consider using refill stations than a year ago. And around 1 in 4 shoppers were actively seeking retailers that offered this as a service. And it has perhaps been seen to this point as a bit of a middle-class badge of honour, but the need to move away from these premium connotations has been illustrated by Asda, which specifies in its trial that it's about being affordable and accessible to all customers. Aldi has hammered home this message too. The products in its refillable aisles are even slightly cheaper than their packaged equivalents. So while pleasing consumers is obviously a considerable carrot for retailers and brands, the big stick obviously of regulation is looming too. Retailers and suppliers face massive costs under government plans to make them pay for packaging waste under the extended producer responsibility coming into force in 2023. Until now, the emphasis has clearly been on recycled packaging, and that makes sense given that refillables demand a significant change in processes and supply chains from retailers in a way that new packaging doesn't. So the road ahead for refill and return won't necessarily be easy, but we fully expect the momentum to continue. Another really nice example, the top-up truck there on the right-hand side of the screen, lovely example. And there are many others across the UK, in this case an old milk float that allows shoppers in Hackney, in this particular scenario, to top up on refillable foods and groceries. And this notion of return and refill is also being challenged in the food service delivery as well as retail. Deliveroo in France and the circular packaging company Bearpack have started offering consumers this option for delivered food to be delivered in reusable containers. There's around 60 of Deliveroo's restaurant partners in and around Paris are currently part of the programme. And if you're a Deliveroo customer wanting to participate, you download the Bearpack app, sign up to either a monthly or yearly subscription, and then enter a code into your Deliveroo account and app, and you can then receive delivered food and also return packaging to participating restaurants. Bearpack are also partnering with Grab in Southeast Asia and also Food Panda in Singapore, a similar scheme or proposition in New York City called Deliver Zero. So look out for this in not only retail but food service as well. And just a note on some of the things that we saw at the show, and I referenced this earlier on, whilst we're talking here about the expected growth in package free, there are many examples of progressive approaches to packaging at the show. Two that really caught my eye. Two farmers and their packaging, the UK's first 100% compostable and plastic-free crisp brand. So great work, them, and the work that they've done to communicate that as part of their proposition, really interesting. And also Kiss of Wine, also at the show, a UK canned wine producer that puts environmental impact very much at the heart of their offer. Cans, obviously, are widely recycled. 70% of cans in the UK are recycled. Aluminium is also infinitely recyclable and uses significantly less CO2 using the recycling process. So a couple of call outs there for brands and businesses at the show doing great things in terms of progressive packaging formats. I also wanted to call out a focus on waste reduction and upcycling as a byproduct. Recently, the World Wildlife Fund and Tesco published Driven to Waste, a new report that quantifies the total amount of food lost each year, not only in the supply chains, but also on farms, revealing that an estimated 2.5 billion tonnes of food goes uneaten around the world each year. And that is an increase to the approximate 1.2 billion tonnes of all on the established estimates of 1.3 billion tonnes wasted each year. And these new estimates indicate that out of all food grown, approximately 40% goes uneaten, which is higher than the estimated 33% that we were using as an estimate prior to that point. So there is an increasing focus on using and repurposing of waste from across our food system. And one of the first upcycle product launches to create headlines was cacao, born out of Mondelez's Snack Futures initiative. Cacao uses part of the cacao fruit that is normally discarded of the cocoa bean process, and you can see that product there on the left-hand side. Just to illustrate the cyclical nature of the fight against food waste, you've also got regrain there on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, rescuing nutritious grains that are a byproduct of beer that is brewed. It turns them into what they describe as boldly seasoned, crunchy, carb-savvy snacks that are low-calorie and a good source of fibre. At the show, you'll have seen Squished. Squished is very much on a mission to change change that perception by rescuing surplus fruit that would have otherwise have gone to waste and turn that into delicious snacks. And also from the show, we had A-Grain. All of their products are made from the byproduct of the malting and mashing grains that are a byproduct from the brewing industry, and also whiskey production as well, to produce things like flours, crisps, granola, and crackers. So a couple of great examples from the show. And the focus on food waste and recycling continues to gain momentum in food service as well. There are an increasing number of outlets putting zero or at least minimal waste at the heart of their culinary philosophy. OSIP in Somerset, the Newt also in Somerset, Root in Bristol, the Sea in London, Coombehead Farm in Cornwall, and of course Silo in London as well, just to name a few. The recently opened Frog by Adam Handling focused on very much on not only sustainability and waste, but sustainability in the context of local luxury through their commitment to, and you can see there on the strapline, there's no such thing as food waste. The restaurant works in harmony with the bar, where it takes trims and offcuts that are repurposed to create things like snacks, bar items, but also drinks as well. The Why Waste, which is the exclusive video series from featuring Massimo Bottura and his team of chefs that teaches us both as consumers, but also chefs and operators as well, how to cut food waste and use that in delicious and imaginative ways. Massimo Bottura said that he doesn't waste anything in his restaurant, Osteria Francescana in Modena. And he states that if you see the invisible potential behind things like stale bread and bruised fruit, vegetable peels, and the crust of a parmesan, then you're able to expand your creativity and use these ingredients rather than throwing them away to create unique experiences for diners. Then I wanted to move on. Another thing that we expect to see more and more of, we've got regen ag. Food is alive with buzzwords, and some of which we've discussed already today. But over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen this rise in momentum behind nature-based farming and regenerative agriculture. It's a term that doesn't have a strict definition, but at its heart, it's about growing food in a way that simultaneously boosts the environment. It typically involves minimal soil disturbance, reduced or zero fertilizer use, and a diverse range of crops and livestock. The premise of this farming technique is about restoring the health of soil that's depleted through other farming methods. The idea is to rebuild soil organic matter, which is about improving soil quality, its water holding ability, and its ability to carbon sequester. This kind of farming is integrating livestock and grazing together, use of cover crops to minimize soil erosion, crop diversity, and no tilling. Such nature-based farming practices have boomed in recent years following a growing recognition of intensive food production's effects on Britain's biodiversity and indeed globally as well. And for some, regenerative agriculture is the future solution. Dimbleby recently said in the recently launched National Food Strategy, the manufacture, production and distribution of food has become an ecological disaster, calling for new and diverse methods of agriculture, including regenerative practices that work with instead of against nature. And we've seen a growth in the options both for the consumer but also the food service operator to access foods that are produced using the alternative production methods. One example on the left-hand side of the screen there, you've got the ethical butcher, very much on a mission to connect people with nature, with farms and farmers. They work with 20 plus farmers who apply regenerative and holistic management practices. They sell online, direct to consumer. They've got a whole range of meat boxes spanning all proteins, barbecue occasions, and also different collaborations. They also launched Regenuary in 2021 at the same time as Veganuary, to encourage consumers to look at regenerative agriculture practices in all of their purchases, regardless of whether they were consuming a vegan or an omnivore's diet. And the example there from the right-hand side, Matt Chatfield, another example, a farmer, former restaurateur from down in Cornwall, who is raising cull yaws, a system whereby mothering sheep at retirement age are grazed and fattened to a higher welfare standard on forested pasture. And then servicing that, aging that meat and taking that into high-end restaurants. Ikoi is a great example. Brat Restaurant is another that takes Matt's cull yaws. It's worth saying that there are many approaches being taken, of which regenerative is one. Progressive farmers are very much working with feed and tech sector to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by modifying feed composition and the like. And what we're saying is that we expect the traction behind regenerative to march on. But it's not just smaller scale challenger businesses that are driving this regenerative approach. Global mega brands, as you can see, the likes of PepsiCo, McCain committing to regenerative agriculture. McDonald's also in the UK is at least starting a change program as they look to drive forward regenerative agricultural techniques in the beef industry. Lots of exciting things happening in that space. So the scope for scaling regenerative agriculture across the entire supply chains is one that's relatively unexplored at the moment, but the momentum behind it is really, really growing. In contrast, but with very much with the same agenda, reducing carbon footprint of our food by vertical and indoor farming continues to gain momentum. In early August, InFarm announced it's to open what it claims to be one of the largest vertical farming operations in Europe, in Bedford in the UK, almost 10,000 square metres. InFarm saying that these growing centres, of which this is one, can generate the crop equivalent of 10,000 square metres of farmland, but using 95% less water, 90% less transport, and zero chemicals and pesticides. So again, vertical farming looks set to continue and rise over the next decade. And we can't forget the monumental growth in plant-based as well as a disruptive force in food and drink. It's the biggest one that we've seen for a generation, and we only expect this to continue with those wider supporting forces behind plant-based, the growth and the accountability of personal health and well-being, which has only been enhanced by COVID-19, but also the fact that the climate, environment and sustainability issues are very much for today and not tomorrow, as we've seen that so far, as we've talked about today. You can see from the graphic on the right-hand side from the BBC in 2020 that environmental is a key motivator for both meat and non-meat eaters as a reason for eating less meat. It's propelled by things like celebrity culture, global campaigns, eat less meat campaigns, governmental and opinion leader nudges, but also a generational relevance to Generation Y and Generation Z as well. And you'll have seen some great examples of those plant-based products at the show, like P-Pops as an example, and other brands as well, very much playing into that space. So in summary, the sustainability wake-up call will only continue. It's becoming increasingly important for consumers, especially Generation Z. Consumers need information to enable positive choice. That's key. We expect a momentum to grow between refill and return. There's also a focus on waste reduction and upcycling. Regenerative approach to both in all areas of agriculture continues to gain momentum, and it's not just about small scale challenger brands, but also larger corporations as well. We expect to see much more from indoor and vertical farming, and we can't ignore the role that plant-based plays in the overall sustainability proposition. So thank you all for listening today. I hope you found that an inspiration and thought-provoking input. I also hope that you enjoyed the show and were able to experience firsthand at the show some of the products and services that we've highlighted during this presentation. Thank you for listening.